I've got a history quiz for you all. Where did this quote come from? They stepped onto the battlefield together, and they saw nothing more touching and pitiful than the head of a woman in one place and the body in another, and her little babe upon the breast of the corpse, a stream of milk on one of its cheeks and a stream of blood on the other. This quote is describing a visit to an Irish battlefield made by a Mrs. Ronnet and her son Adamnan, and this was in the late 7th century A.D., when the custom of the time in that part of Ireland was to throw women into the front lines of combat, with the cowardly men advancing behind the women, whipping the women forward to injury and death. And so Ronnet and Adamnan were just there surveying the carnage of a typical battle, and there were countless dead women and girls. Adamnan would become a famous jurist. He would go on to be a Christian statesman, a church leader, and a scholar. He's the man who wrote the Law of the Innocence, which reformed the barbaric practices of warfare, making it illegal for any tribe or nation to place women in combat. And this law passed in 697 AD, and immediately it brought civilizing effects to war and peace and the condition of women, not only in Irish society, but far beyond. Now today, America is a full generation into an experiment. Women and political correctness are being mixed together in the U.S. Armed Forces. Politicians have clearly forgotten that military service is about fighting wars with enemies who don't play political games when they go to war. They fight to win, to kill, to terrorize, to humiliate their enemies, and even to desecrate their bodies. These are the enemies that we're fighting today. Our new president gave us a recent update on our new military and gave us his pledge to bring an intensity of purpose, that's a quote, an intensity of purpose and mission to really change the culture and habits of the U.S. military.
Where we're making good progress designing body armor that fits women properly, tailoring combat uniforms for women, creating maternity flight suits, updating requirements for their hairstyles.
Now let me repeat this. Look at this carefully. We're designing body armor that fits women properly, tailoring combat uniforms for women, creating maternity flight suits, and updating requirements for their hairstyles. Now, what's the reasoning here? Maybe it's easier for American men to watch a young mother die if she is stylishly outfitted. Maybe the next upgrade in uniforms will come with a camouflage baby carrier similar to those slings worn by the Irish moms who were forced into the jaws of death by the cowardly men of the 7th century. Back then, women were regarded as having so little value. They could be expended as cannon fodder in Irish tribal warfare. Now, so what was their cultural status? Exactly. They were valued only as slaves. They slept outside their houses like watchdogs. Well, that was their purpose. That's how they were being used. They stood to the side of the table holding candles while the men ate in the little dark houses that they lived in. And their worth as coinage was roughly equal to 3 cows on the local market. And today in America, military women are little more than coinage in the political sweepstakes of diversity and egalitarianism. This is raw exploitation of women, many of whom are too young to really know how they're being used and abused. In the service, they now serve a really cruel agenda, a political agenda. They suffer many forms of abuse along the way, but combat trauma is one of the worst. The military knows this and is doing nothing to put a stop to this insanity, but instead rolling out the maternity uniforms for stage 3 and the destruction of American military combat readiness. Now look at this data from the Military Health System Research Symposium. More than, you can see a link in the notes below about it, more than 1,000 military women have experienced combat-related injuries in Iraq and Afghanistan. More than half of the injuries happened during the woman's first deployment, because we just put them right out there in harm's way, and they experienced harm. Of the 1,000 women, 1,012 to be exact, 40% were diagnosed with a mental health disorder within the first year. Now, this, of course, did not fit the political script of female deployment in the military services, because current political dogma implies what? That women are supermen. They're supposed to be supermen, and we treat them that way. So instead of rejecting a dangerous policy when it is clinically proven, the military introduces a new Darwinian policy, but we're not hearing about that. You can read about it in the link below. Now women must be chemically evolved, chemically altered to fit today's twisted political narrative. And so women will now be chemically twisted to be more manlike in the face of death, in the face of carnage, in the face of physical abuse, with experimental drugs designed to make women resilient. And that's the word that they're using in this study, to make women resilient to the anxiety and the depression and the psychological trauma that comes with injury and cruelty and battlefield rape, death experienced by their friends all around them in real world warfare. So how much carnage will they see and experience and survive before we know, if we can then track the survivors of this, before we know if the new reality-altering drugs really actually work on women? So I've got a message for you young women out there who you've been thinking about joining up and fitting into the smart new uniforms of the new American military. Do you truly want to be guinea pigs in an experiment with America's enemies, in America's Army laboratories? One thing the recruiter will not tell you when you sign your contract: while America plays these political games with you, our enemies are still going to be fighting to win and humiliate and dominate any combatant that they encounter in real life. And so as Mrs. Ronnet and her son, Adamnan, looked over the real-world carnage in Ireland in the 7th century, and just try to imagine that for a minute, the mother turned to the son and she solemnly charged him. She said this: "To thee henceforth it is given to free the women of the Western world." And he did what he could, and he inspired the creation of many different codes of honor and chivalry and military conduct, which for centuries protected women and children during war. But none of those codes make any sense anymore when the value of women that they achieved over the centuries is now being stripped away from them in the name of political fashion. I'm Jeffrey Botkin. Please do subscribe and get notifications about new video releases. Thank you.